I'll write hi in the chat. Oh, wait, due to Facebook restriction. Yeah, I already know all this. Be Live telling me about how they can't show us who's saying what in the chat if it's Facebook. That's why I kind of like the YouTube people better. We can see it. But anyways, this is all. No one cares about this. Hi, everyone. This isn't the actual show, by the way. This is the pre-show. Anyone who's watched the live shows know that there's a solid 5 minutes of scrambling and Brian and I trying to set this up. And then I'll power through. We're not going to have any edit points. It's going to be a perfect show. I'm pretty confident.
Yeah, me too. I'm extremely confident. Do you have the right mic?
You tell me. Let me see here.
You don't sound great, but
I don't?
frequently don't sound great, and it ends up being fine. Well, no, I've told you a bunch of times, and it always ends up that it's fine. So
okay. Well, it says that I'm on the Yeti microphone on Be Live, but you're saying it sounds like poo-poo?
No, it sounds fine. It just sounds a little tinny or echoey, but I think it's probably okay.
Okay. That's a shame. Maybe I should get that thing back. I used to have this like blocker sound thing, but then it didn't have space for it when I reset up my whole thing. But anyway. All right, want to do a countdown on Audacity?
Yeah.
Okay. So, all right. Let's count. 3, 2, 1. Record.
Recording.
Woo! We did it. Okay. We are off. Big show coming up. Any last things before we... Oh, I didn't press the... Okay. Started the mistake times thing. It's a little off by a couple seconds. I'll have to... But we won't have any edits, so it won't matter. I'm trying a bit of a new setup here, Brian, in my desktop, like how I'm laying out my windows. So we'll see how that looks. Okay. Here we go. I'm gonna drink a Coke Zero. Oh, Brian, I also want to show you something. I found this. Look at my cool new old school Keeping Karlsson shirt.
Yeah.
I had a thought. This is like a really good logo. I know you pointed out. Like, I don't know. I kind of feel like if we were doing anyways, I think we should talk off the show. I feel like maybe next season we go like retro or something. Go back to this awesome logo. Look how cool it is.
I
guess we don't agree. I think it's like the coolest logo we've ever had. Our logo now is cool, but
I don't agree. I would say it ranks 3 of 3.
Wow. Take a look again next time. It's got the puck.
I have the shirts. I didn't have to find them because I treasure them. They're always available to me.
To me, it's like I look at this logo and I'm like, damn, that is something. But I mean, I guess I think that about all the logos. I don't know. Maybe it's just like the absence makes the heart grow fonder. But okay, let's start here. Ready to go?
Yeah.
Any final thoughts?
No, I'm just ready for you to be very disappointed in what I choose to say at the start of the show.
Why? What are you gonna say that's gonna disappoint me?
Well, I am going to mention a lot of references, and I'm going to read something.
Okay. That's okay. Reading something is good. I personally, I just was saying my opinion is like when you say a lot of references, no one's actually like, writing it down. They're going to like just check the notes after. So, but I guess if you want to just like show how you have got this big group of references together, that doesn't hurt. Sure. Yeah. And then we'll link it in the notes, obviously, so people will be able to read it afterwards. Okay.
Of course.
Okay, yes. All right, here we go. Yeah, yes! Welcome, everybody, to the longest-running fantasy hockey podcast in the world, hosted by two guys who are probably not going to be moving on in the Keeping Karlsson playoff pool because Tom is crushing us right now. I am your host, Elon Dubrovsky, and with me, of course, is my co-host and longtime, very, very good friend, longer-time good friend than co-host, but here he is, Brian Com.
Hello, Elon. Hello, everybody. It's nice to be back. And yes, the Venerable Tom. That's a very relevant reference, Elon. Everybody who listens to our show knows exactly who Tom is and understands why he's crushing us.
I mean, if they listened to last week's episode, they would know he was the star of the show. He mocked me when I picked Kadri ahead of Landeskog, and so far, I guess he's getting the last laugh. But we'll see. That was a really fun time last week.
We all mocked you when you did that.
Yeah, so far Kadri's not doing so badly, I gotta say. But anyway, yeah, it was a really fun show. Thanks again to those people who joined us this week. Just Brian and I again, back down to 2. We won't ever go less than 2. I don't think that would be probably a pretty awkward show. But here we go, Brian. We've got a lot to get to this week. This has been a pretty crazy week in hockey and in the world, of course. So let's start by talking about the big news from this past week, which goes beyond hockey, right? Like the Thursday and Friday games got postponed, but this came after the NBA, WNBA, MLB, MLS. They all postponed games on Wednesday to protest the Jacob Blake shooting. NHL took a lot of criticism for being one of the only leagues to play games on that Wednesday. Then they did cancel the next 2 days. Then I saw a lot of people mad on Twitter at the NHL, like on the other side. There was like a hashtag boycott NHL trending, which is really stupid. Like people mad that they did take those 2 games to reflect on everything going on and protest racism. So I don't know. Anyway, Brian, I know you have a lot you wanted to say about this. So I'm just going to give you the floor after my awkward introduction, and please go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, it felt like this watershed moment, right? When the basketball teams in the NBA and the WNBA decided they weren't going to play, and then hockey goes and does its thing, which is takes this really weird, like not quite on the nose and very uninvested attempt at doing something, which is just putting end racism on the scoreboard. And it sort of just called back to when this whole thing began, when the hockey returned after all the Black Lives Matter protests that had been happening. Hockey came back with the weakest statement and the weakest show of unity and support. And it just sort of called back to that and reminded me of how I felt. And like you said, Elon, like you'll give me the platform and I can say whatever I want. But the truth is, I'm not the one who should be speaking, right? It's not my voice. It's not your voice. It's the voices of Black and Indigenous people of color who we need to be listening to understand exactly how we get out of this. I'm going to call it a pickle, but that really underserves what it really is for us all. Like these deep-seated issues of racial injustice that we had a couple days to think about. And Elon, we talked about whether we would even be doing a show tonight just to make sure that we're sort of giving the appropriate amount of time for people to reflect and process and think. And like, that's all I ask anyone listening. And like I said, instead of my words, I'm going to share, this is from an interview at The Athletic. They did a roundtable with a number of representatives from different communities, Black and Indigenous people of color. It was a roundtable for how we respond is going to be different. It's called NHL Social Equality and What's Next. And one of the people on the panel was Renee Hess, who is the founder and director of Black Girl Hockey Club, which has been growing and growing over the last, it's probably about a year and a half now, if not longer. But that's how long I've been following. Anyway, Renee was part of the roundtable. And he asked her these 4 questions, and Renee posted her full answers on Twitter, which weren't all included in the article. So just going to share them here and think about it. It's food for thought, I hope. So the first question was, what did you think of the NHL's decision to postpone games? And the answer was, it's important that Black fans and players see those in the professional league standing together with the people on the issue of Black lives. The essential part of this process is, of course, tangible steps to eradicate systemic racism in hockey, and the NHL has the opportunity to lead the way. And by the way, a lot of these questions that The Athletic asked were questions that I think a lot of fans had too, which is why I've chosen them. Second question was, why does the NHL and hockey's response to social justice issues often look different than other sports? And Renee's answer was that she thinks many non-Black players and executives have the privilege to focus on hockey and not contemplate those identities, intersectional and identities. Anti-racism work requires engagement and discomfort. There's no better time than this watershed moment in sports history for the NHL to shift the narrative and show their fans that they believe Black lives matter. Then when she was asked what's a good next step for a sport, looking to the future, that's still catching up on the race conversation. Other leagues have gotten in earlier and been working on it longer. Renee's answer was that the time for listening and learning is over. We need the NHL to take tangible steps to diversify hockey, to address hiring disparities, financial gatekeeping, and racism in youth hockey. Education is key, and conversations about police violence against Black people and what the league plans to do when an inevitable instance of brutality happens again need to be made an ongoing priority. This isn't a one-time thing. This is a culture shift. And when asked what her realistic hope for the future for racism in hockey it was that the hockey community realizes that having only 30 or so active Black players in the league does not mean Black issues aren't their problem. Anti-Blackness is not political, but a public health issue, a moral issue, a value system. Black fans and players are watching and waiting to see if the sport we love truly does love us back. And this sort of also calls back to something that I watched this panel talk that we'll link in the show notes along with a bunch of other resources. But Kim Davis, who has a role in management with the NHL, she's I'm blanking on the title now, but she's a vice president of something. And that really does her a disservice. So sorry. But essentially she said the NHL
Brian, I could edit, right? Like, why don't you look up what it is?
Kim Davis.
Vice president of something.
NHL. Yeah, it sounded worse than I thought. A senior executive VP. Here we go. Okay. Kim Davis, who's this NHL senior executive vice president of social impact, growth initiatives, and legislative affairs, she said that the league has to be willing to, and the sport has to be willing to lose something in order to gain something down the road. And so she's actually even, tipping to a business perspective, but also that's not the first and foremost, especially if you watch the panel talk, which again, we'll link in the show notes. The idea was hey, you're going to have some skin in the game for you to make some real progress. And if you lose some people along the way, ultimately the reward will be worth whatever is lost. And then I'll also mention one other thing, Elon, which is another answer about from that same article. And this is from Duante Abercrombie, who is Washington's Fort DuPont Ice Hockey Club alumni and now an assistant coach at Stevenson University. When asked what the next step is for hockey and racism, his answer was, I'm going to fix my 10-foot radius. And I felt like this resonated with me and hopefully you as a listener. It's not a big thing you have to do, but if you can fix your 10-foot radius, there's not much I can do for someone across the country, but I can definitely take care of my 10 feet. If I hear something said wrong at the mall or in one of my locker rooms, my peer group, my dinner table, that's where the conversations need to be had. These conversations are only uncomfortable because you haven't had them before. The more you have uncomfortable conversations, the more comfortable you get with having them. And if this all makes you uncomfortable or uneasy or you don't like it, if you were mad about hockey not being there for those couple nights and you were stewing over it and you're stewing right now listening to us, I guess my one question for you would be, why is that? And I think if you take some time to find the answer, I hope you'll come to the conclusion that this is all what's needed right now and is all something worth supporting. We're going to leave a whole list of links for you. But if you want to make that earnest and sincere effort to get educated and learn about the whole idea of anti-racism and how it's related to sports and how it's related specifically to hockey, we're linking a bunch of podcasts, a bunch of articles, a bunch of Twitter follows, media people, organizations, players, and fans in the show notes. And also we will share some links to organizations we've made donations to as well. At the end of the day, for us, fantasy hockey is for everyone, and it's really important to us in our community that everybody listening hopefully makes the earnest effort to listen to what's being asked of you in supporting racial justice and equity, and to step up to the plate when the time is called for, which is now, in my opinion.
Okay, great stuff, Brian. Yeah, definitely check out our show notes for a lot more content, and we'd love to, engage. Tweet at us at Keeping Karlsson, and if you have any questions about anything Brian was saying or you want to just discuss, I feel this is an important issue. And yeah, I mean, now we're going to get into some nonsense, relatively speaking, compared to this. Talking about hockey and sports in general is probably a little nonsense compared to this. But then fantasy hockey and super niche, and now fantasy hockey during the NHL playoffs and trying to read into how our fantasy leagues are affected by what's going on in a playoff game. Obviously, we're all just trying to have a little fun here. So yeah, there's some serious stuff. And now, Brian, I guess we'll transition into some very non-serious fun stuff. But yeah,
I guess the idea is, of course, we're going to try and go on and live our lives in a meaningful way and do what we need to feel good and happy, but not to ignore whatever else is happening, which is why I think we had this conversation at the top of the show rather than at the bottom. There are certain things you need to address and face up to before going on with the rest of your life as normal.
Right. Okay. But so with that, let's move on to talk about the huge Toronto Maple Leafs trade, which is probably not even that huge, but obviously this was a big news item this past week because obviously there's not much going on outside of the playoffs. We don't have like trades and free agent signings, but I actually didn't realize, Brian, that there are trades happening right now. Like, it does see, I almost thought like it's a little unfair because, you know, let's say some other team, let's say Colorado is interested in Kasperi Kapanen, but they're a little busy right now. They can't be worried about negotiating trades because they're busy playing a freaking playoff series. I don't know. I was surprised that teams are allowed to make trades once they're eliminated and they don't wait till like kind of everyone is in the same position. Oh, you're muted.
Also, since we've made an edit point, can you just tack this on at the end of my last piece before you started talking about the trade?
Well, why don't you just do it and then I'll start over because it makes my life easier.
Oh, okay. All the resources, by the way, that we've mentioned are going to be available in the show notes, as we said, but you can also go to keepingkarlsson.com/BLM to see the full list.
Okay. Yes. Very good. What is that going to actually link to, though? Just so I'm clear, a Google Doc?
I will make it. I'll make something, and you can you'll set up the forward. Okay, so now I'm going to answer.
No, now I'm going to ask again so that I don't have to do crazy edits. Okay. Right, yeah, and that link will also be in the show notes, so you don't have to worry if you missed it. But yeah, keepingkarlsson.com/BLM. Okay, Brian, so let's go and talk about the next biggest piece of news in the NHL this past week, which obviously is a lot farther down, but I guess a big deal, especially to Leafs fans out there, because they pulled the trigger on a deal sending Kasperi Kapanen to the Penguins. We'll talk about that obviously in just a second. First of all, Brian, I didn't even know, or maybe I knew, but I had forgotten that teams are allowed to make trades like while the playoffs are still going. To me, I don't know, it just felt a little bit unfair. Like, imagine if the Colorado Avalanche like were interested in potentially trading for a Kapanen, but they're a little busy right now because they're, you know, fighting for their lives in a playoff series against Dallas. They don't have time to be negotiating trades, and all of a sudden, oh, it's too late. Like, it just seems like such an odd rule that like teams are allowed to make trades that are eliminated even though there's other teams still playing. Maybe it's just me. I don't know.
What was even weirder was when the playoffs began and there were only, like, including the play-ins, there were just the 7 or 8 teams that weren't in the playoffs could still trade. So Ottawa and New Jersey could have technically pulled off a trade while the other 24 teams in the league were starting their playoff runs. That would have been funny and entertaining. I'm actually looking down the list. I don't think any of those teams who were out of the playoffs made one, but it would have been fun. I'm all in to it does seem knee-jerk, though. Like, I don't understand why Pittsburgh and Toronto felt the need to do this now, but by all means, go ahead. Why wait?
I mean, if there's a GM that's happy with the offer, you know, it's just like in real fantasy hockey, right? You don't want to wait and let the trade fall through. Like, if you're happy with the deal, you got to pull the trigger right away before it gets pulled off the table. And I guess we can discuss now who we think's got the better deal, who should have waited. So just to break down the deal, the Penguins sent Evan Rodriguez, who's been a guy we've talked about on the show now and then. I think he had a small fantasy impact on Buffalo a couple seasons ago. It was, they sent Rodriguez, a prospect named Philip Hallander, who's apparently someone who people are somewhat high on. They think maybe he'll make the Leafs roster in the next season or two. David Warovsky, and 2020 first-round pick, 15th overall. So that was the package to the Leafs in exchange for Kapanen, Jesper Lindgren, and Pontus Aberg. Or is it Auberg? I don't know. I'm going to say Auberg. Yes, Jesper Lindgren and Pontus Aberg. Kapanen, by the way, 2 years left in his contract at $3.2 million AAV, which doesn't sound too bad, but I know for the Leafs, who are so cap strapped, like, I guess they're just trying to shed salary wherever they can. So they get a pretty decent return. It looks like they get this prospect in Hallander. They get a first-round pick, who obviously you'd expect is going to turn into something good. It's also a very interesting trade just because it's like fitting. The Leafs actually acquired Kapanen from Pittsburgh 5 years ago, almost to the day, like, a month ago in June, like 2015, they sent Kapanen to Pittsburgh, they got Kapanen from Pittsburgh in the Phil Kessel trade. So that trade was Kessel, Tyler Biggs, Tim Erickson, and a 2016 second-round pick for Scott Harrington, Kapanen, who ended up being the big return, Nick Spalling, and a first pick in the 2016 draft. I was just digging into this, Brian, because I was interested. So that first round pick in 2016 that Toronto got for Kessel along with Kapanen, they ended up trading that pick to Anaheim in the Frederik Andersen trade, and Anaheim ended up taking Sam Steele with that pick. And he's someone who people are pretty high on. He had an underwhelming rookie season, but people seem to be very excited about him moving forward. So, Brian, before we dig into the trade, would it be crazy for me to ask you at this point, should we rank the 4 people involved in this trade tree who have some fantasy relevance right now? Like Kapanen, Steele, Kessel, Anderson. Obviously, Kessel, has had a great career, but at this point, a huge dud in these playoffs and in this season, aside from, I guess he had a good round against Nashville, but he really blew it for me in the KKPP. And is this a really stupid question to try to rank these 4 people in terms of their actual, not fantasy, like NHL value right now, if you were trying to like trade them, see what you could get for them?
This is why you're the best, Elon. And the dregs, we're not in the official offseason yet, but we might as well be for fantasy terms. You've come up with this great question with history for us to find something to talk about. It does feel like pretty obvious on how to rank this trade tree. You've got to go Freddie Andersen first, easy. Then I think it's Phil Kessel, at least if you're asking me today. And then I would say Sam Steele, and before Kasperi Kapanen. I think there's still reason to be optimistic. But Sam Steele, remember, this was just his first full season. He's 21 years old, which is, a reasonable age. It's not an excuse to have a bad season as a rookie. When we see, if someone's 18, 19, 20, then it's bad. 21 years old, by then as a rookie, you should be ready to go all in. But Sam Steele was playing on Anaheim, and there wasn't a whole lot for him to work with there. It seemed like he had the coach's confidence. He had Dallas Eakins' confidence. He was getting deployment. He was getting put in interesting situations, and he made something of it. Yes, 22 points in 65 games. Bad. There's no other way to slice it. But on the whole, I don't see a reason to be so down on him after we were just so high on him. Like, his pedigree still remains from that crazy high scoring career that Steele had in the WHL with Regina, and which he essentially did the AHL equivalent of when he was a rookie in 18-19. So good for Steele to have a good first season in pretty rough circumstances. I still think he'll be better than Kapanen. I guess in terms of fantasy relevance, though, Kapanen playing up in the top 6 in Pittsburgh would certainly make him relevant, just assuming he can make something of it.
Yeah, I mean, I was just talking about real life value. We'll get into the fantasy in just a little bit. I wonder, Brian, I don't think Pittsburgh would trade Kapanen for Phil Kessel if they had the option. So obviously that takes contract into account, but I kind of am. I wonder if Phil Kessel's actually the bottom at this point. We'll have to see if he still has anything left next year. I'm starting to get the sense now. And then with goalies also, Frederik Andersen, I guess he's on a pretty good contract, $5 million a year for, I guess, one more year, I believe. I don't know. Teams seem to be wary for trading for a goalie at this point, especially once it's someone in their 30s. So I don't know. Maybe I'm with you on Sam Steele, maybe above Kapanen. It would be interesting to see if Pittsburgh and Anaheim, who would think that they're getting the better deal there. But for the other two, I don't know. But anyway, okay, that was a really silly question. So let's get to digging into the fantasy impact of this trade. The Leafs obviously made this trade, like I said, to shed salary. They get the prospect, they get the pick. So I don't know. We'll talk about the impact on them in a little bit, but obviously the big thing here is Kapanen, who's an actual NHL player, going to the Penguins. It seems like the Penguins are banking on him being a top 6 forward, and they're banking on, like, the reason why they're making this trade and trading prospects and a pick to get Kapanen is because they think their window is still open, or they're trying to wedge it as open as they can. Like, while Crosby and Malkin are still elite, they want to see if they could take another kick at the can here. I saw a quote from Jim Rutherford, the GM of the Penguins, on a Sportsnet article. He said, Kapanen plays the style that the Penguins play. So I guess he likes that about him, whatever that means. I guess like a two-way play. We like his speed. We feel that he was blocked out in Toronto, right on the right behind. We felt he was blocked out in Toronto on the right side behind Mitch Marner and William Nylander. We feel he can play in the top 6. So obviously the big takeaway for me here is if the GM, and who knows if the coach will agree. We saw in Buffalo, sometimes the coach and the GM don't always agree on these acquisitions, if you look at Jeff Skinner. But seems like the GM is saying that they want Kapanen in the top 6, which of course, as people always lose their minds. I feel like actually at this point, this is one of the rare times where people aren't really losing their minds as much. Usually when a player gets traded to the Penguins, everyone's like, oh my God, everyone grab this person in fantasy. They're going to play with Crosby or Malkin. I haven't heard that as much. I've mainly heard people saying Kapanen's not that good, and why did the Penguins pay a high price for him? But got to imagine if Kapanen does land in the top 6, that could be a good spot, right? He could play, let's say, with Crosby and I don't know, Gensel, and that leaves Zucker with Malkin and Brian Rust. Like that's a solid top six. That would actually make our lives a lot easier, Brian. If that could just be cemented, maybe they could shuffle around in between them. But if we don't have to worry about the Dominic Simones and the Zach Aston Reeses and Connor Sherrys of the world, jumping in, we have to figure out, does this person have fantasy value? I can't decide. And also, you don't know if they're going to last. So I hope Kapanen sticks in the top six just to make our lives easier. And yeah, we'll see if it works out for the Penguins. But what do you think? First of all, I guess the main two questions are, do you think he's going to be able to hold a spot playing on the wing with either Crosby or Malkin all season? And then if yes, what kind of upside should we be looking at? Because Kapanen's coming off a 43-point pace season, which is a bit of a disappointment. His previous season, he had a 46-point pace. So he hasn't broken 50 yet. You got to think he should be able to do it if he plays all year on the wing in Pittsburgh, but I have a feeling you're going to say maybe not.
I'm just going to say this is the same story that we've seen this movie before. Elon, add another name to the pile. Kasperi Kapanen's. I can't feel any more certain that Kapanen is going to do much more if he does get that spot next to Crosby in the top six, and guys like Dominic Simone or Connor Sherry did, who, by the way, aren't awful and have looked okay there, either like Simone recently, Sherry not so recently. But I still think they both count as competition to Kapanen. Though, of course, if Mike Sullivan thinks it's Kasperi Kapanen's job and he had a say in acquiring him, that's all that matters. I'm not saying that I don't want Kapanen to take the spot, which would mean, by the way, there'd be 0 top 6 spots in Pittsburgh for us to question and comment on the revolving door, which is never happened in the history of this podcast. That'd be very exciting from a personal standpoint if Kapanen could hold on to that top spot. But also, when he did get a turn in Toronto this year, which didn't happen often, he didn't do very well in it. He only got 5 or 10 games playing up with Austin Matthews. And I don't know, this could be a chicken or an egg thing. Did he not get the games because he didn't play well, or did he not play well because he didn't have enough runway to lead up and learn and build that chemistry? I don't know. But that is still a red flag for him coming into Pittsburgh, along with the inherent red flag of becoming Crosby's winger, which is truly a boom or bust spot. There's not a lot of middle ground from what we've seen in the past. So Kapanen's upside could probably be anywhere from 50 to 70 points. We have no idea. We haven't seen anything of him with Crosby, and we haven't seen barely anything of him for over a calendar year now, since he was buried for much of the season in Toronto. So we'll see if Crosby in Pittsburgh might be a better fit for him. I'm keeping an open mind, but this is not a slam dunk for me.
Yeah, for sure. That makes sense. Also, we should point out that this whole conversation could be moot, right? We don't know what else Pittsburgh is going to do in the offseason. Maybe they've been saying that they might be trading one of their goalies. Maybe Matt Murray is going to be going. Maybe they get a forward for Matt Murray, and all of a sudden we're looking at Kapanen as potentially a bottom 6 guy. So, we're just talking about this now. Things can change. And yeah, I definitely agree with you. Nothing's a guarantee. I wouldn't even be surprised if Kapanen doesn't hold the top 6 spot, and maybe he is a middle 6 guy, third liner, playing with a Nick Bjugstad, a solid, not shut down line, but a 2-way line that can be somewhat of a threat and also play responsibly, which might not be such a bad thing for the Penguins, right? Maybe they have Dominic Simone playing with Crosby, and they have Kapanen on the third line. Maybe they're very happy with how that works out for them. Obviously, if they're winning games in the end, so we'll have to see. So yeah, I personally, when you say 50 to 70 point upside, if there's someone that is thinking that way in the draft and wants to take a risk, I feel I would just let someone else pick Kapanen. As of now, anyways. Obviously, there's going to be training camp, and depending on when your fantasy drafts are, sometimes you see someone's having their chemistry with the line mate, and like Rutherford said, he plays the way the Penguins do. So who knows? Maybe
whatever that means. What is Jim Rutherford even? Honestly, my confidence in Jim Rutherford and the Penguins as a whole, consequently, has been totally shaken by this playoff experience and what Pittsburgh gave up for Kapanen. It's a lot. This is someone who didn't look like anything special as a 23-year-old sophomore. You'd think you'd be buying low, and Pittsburgh's already doing Toronto a favor by easing their cap crunch. So it feels like a couple contracts would be all Pittsburgh should have needed to offer. But 15th overall in a good draft feels excessive. And so there's that move. And of course, Rutherford's comments about, tripling down or quadrupling down at this point on Jack Johnson, saying, it's not his fault. The third pairing was fine, which, by the way, is a Mike Sullivan problem too. So is Matt Murray, which is just which executive is the one that believes the most in these guys and insists that they continue seeing ice time when it clearly did not seem to be the best thing for the team. And then you also say, the acquisition of Jason Zucker looks really good, and it probably still could be, but the Penguins had these issues on defense that maybe they should have solved before adding a piece to Crosby's wing, which is not a spot where you're going to get a whole ton of added value because Crosby's so good just on his own. So, sorry to go off on a rant there, Elon, but just when Jim Rutherford is talking that's the talk of a GM who's ready to lose, in my opinion, like ready to lose his job, not who wants to lose, but it's just like talking in an old, outdated way. He plays Pittsburgh Penguins hockey. It's a way to say, I personally like him and think he fits in with the team. It's not, for me, a real meaningful justification.
Yeah, for sure. Also, it's like PR, right? They're trying to justify the trade to their fans. It's similar how Jack Johnson was great because he's the guy under contract. Justin Schultz, he was terrible. He's garbage because he's a UFA and they have no interest in bringing him back, obviously, the way they're talking about Justin Schultz. So we'll see what the Penguins do. Maybe they'll sign someone in UFA. Maybe we'll trade a goalie and we'll see how they look for next year. Interesting situation to follow. Over on the Leafs, so we've obviously got Tavares, Marner, Matthews, Nylander, and Zach Hyman. They're probably locked into the top 6. And then we had, Kapanen, like you said, sometimes took a turn with Matthews. He also took some time on the Tavares line. So that was someone for Andreas Johnsson, like Ilya Mikheyev to compete with. So theoretically, I could see this trade, again, assuming nothing else changes, but I could see this potentially being good for a Johnsson or a Mikheyev just to give them a better shot at hanging in the top 6 for longer in Toronto. That's kind of the only main fantasy impact I could think of on Toronto. I have a hunch the Leafs aren't done. Like, they need D, and I feel like it's likely they'll maybe make another trade of some middle bottom 6 person. I've also even heard rumors that they might trade Frederik Andersen. So who knows? I'm not going to read too much into the fantasy impact on Toronto here, but like, good for an Ilya Mikheyev or Andreas Johnsson if Johnsson's even still around next year.
Sorry, I wasn't ready for you to end. Okay. You mentioned Johnsson.
Yeah. I said if he's even still around.
Yeah, I don't think much changes in Toronto because Kapanen wasn't really in the picture already. So there's not a whole lot of new opportunity. Over on Dobber Hockey, Cam Robinson made the case for Nick Robertson being someone who stands to benefit because there's now this spot for him on the third line, which makes sense. But of course, in terms of fantasy, his upside is going to be limited from that spot on the depth chart.
Right, okay. I thought I saw. Anyways, I won't put it on the show. Doesn't matter. I think for the first half of the season, Kapanen was playing in the top 6 with either Tavares or Matthews, and it was just in the second half he went away. But yeah, whatever. Yeah, I think the point's made. Maybe I'll do DraftKings now, and then we could go and then do the tail end of the show. Does that work for you? You're muted. I can't hear you.
Yeah, that's great. Grace is starting, by the way.
Oh, good. I have him in. Oh, it's too late now, anyways. So Good thing. All right. Okay, so that is the Leafs and Penguins trade, and now we're going to get into some playoff hockey talk, what we've learned and seen over the past week. Before we get to that, though, let's take a second and thank our sponsor for this episode and all of our playoffs episodes. For this episode and all of our playoff episodes, and those are our friends over at DraftKings. Brian, I've been having a blast with our Keeping Karlsson DraftKings League that we made over on our Discord. I don't know, we're doing a lot of like fun stuff with our patrons over the summer. But anyways, that's a whole side thing, but we've been doing this DraftKings League. We actually have a matchup going on right now. Nathan McKinnon, who I spent a lot of my budget on, only has 1 assist so far. So we'll see. This game is still going. Dallas and Colorado. But yeah, DraftKings is a ton of fun. So let me tell you about it. So first of all, it's not only for hockey. It's like open for all the different sports. It's daily fantasy. Specifically, I don't know if you're aware, Brian, the football season, a lot of people are into football. It's less than 10 days away with the reigning champs set to take the field to kick off the season. And there's no better place to get in on all the action than with DraftKings, the leader in one-day fantasy sports. And to celebrate week 1 of football season, DraftKings is putting you in the center of the action with 2 shots at $1 million top prize. So get in on all the action now. Make it rain with Making it rain with DraftKings is easy. You draft your team, you stay under the salary cap, and pile up the points for, in football, yards, touchdowns, so much more. We play in hockey, you might not be surprised to hear, and goals, assists, shots. It's actually very interesting. You get a bonus if you take, it's like a certain number of points for shots, and you get a bonus if you take like 3+ shots. You really want to get those guys. That's one strategy I've learned. Not that I've ever won any of these things. Brian probably could give more strategy, but I found that you want to take the guys who take a lot of shots. Anyways, on top of that amazing offer that I just told you about, DraftKings is giving away a share of up to $100 million. That's right. That's what it says, in prizes to all users who enter their free football survivor pool. All you have to do is sign up for DraftKings, enter their survivor pool, and you'll instantly get a share of up to $100 million in giveaways. With all this cash up for grabs, there's no better place to get in on all of the action than with DraftKings. I'll let you take it from here.
And to get in on all of that action, download the top-rated DraftKings app now and use the promo code Karlsson, Eric's last name, to get a free shot at $1 million top prize. And for a limited time, get your share of $100 million in prizes once you enter DraftKings' free survivor pool. That's promo code Karlsson to get in on all of the action for a limited time only at DraftKings. Minimum $5 deposit required. Other terms and conditions and eligibility restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com for details. DraftKings.
I thought you were going to say like a tagline there.
I was trying to, and it didn't come.
Do a draft and feel like a king. I don't know. This is like the worst. And then now we'll try to think of something better for next week. Yeah, if you're interested in playing with us, we have like free leagues and like $1 leagues that we're playing with our patrons and listeners. So just like message us at Keeping Karlsson on Twitter, or if you're a patron, like message in the Facebook group. We'll let you know how to join our DraftKings league, and you could beat me every day. Brian, I suck at this. I don't know why. It's hard.
It's really hard. I've been doing well, but it's I take no credit for doing well.
Today, I decided to go with Thomas Greiss in net because he's playing against Philly. So watch him get blown up. That game's about to start. And I decided to go a couple of Vancouver players because I feel like Vegas is probably going to play Fleury. And I just think it would be funny if Fleury sucks after that whole incident with his agent posting how he was stabbed in the back. So now I just think that if Fleury plays really badly, to justify the Penguins, to justify the Golden Knights decision to play Leonard like even more. So I don't know. You probably shouldn't be making your lineup decisions based on what would be the most funny outcome. But maybe that's why I haven't won so much yet.
Yeah, so maybe just change your choices to go with the most somber outcome, the least funny outcome.
Yeah, the most boring outcome. I know Ben, our friend from Short Shifts, he would say the most boring outcome is for the Islanders to do well and win, which is why I'm wearing my Islanders hat right now, just to
you in that Islanders hat.
Well, hey, they keep winning. I'm going to keep wearing the hat. I was saying I was going to buy a new hat at the end of the playoffs and going into next season, but maybe I just got to double down on the Islanders. But okay, we'll get to the Islanders. I wanted to start by actually talking about this series of the Canucks and the Golden Knights. They're playing another game today, but right now we're at a situation where it is 2-1 for Vegas. Tyler Toffoli returned for the Canucks for game 2 of that series. He made an immediate impact with... Oh, man. Tyler Toffoli returned for that game. He made an immediate impact in the 5-2 when he picked up a goal and 2 assists. Remember, he was out for like the large majority of the playoffs. Then he comes back right away, goal, 2 assists. Foley really cementing himself as like such a great acquisition. Though obviously things didn't go as well yesterday for him. The Canucks were shut out by Leonard, so no one got any points. The Canucks actually went with some interesting lines in that game. They had Pettersson with Toffoli and Tanner Pearson, then Horvat with JT Miller and Brock Besser. So like we haven't seen Pettersson and JT Miller or Horvat and Tanner Pearson split up like pretty much at all season. But I guess Travis Green was trying something new yesterday. Clearly didn't work that well. He didn't score a goal. Obviously, Leonard gets a lot of credit, but I'll be interested to see what the lines are tonight. So maybe if you're listening to the show, check out at Game Day Lines. We'll have retweeted at that point what the lines were. Obviously, we still have a lot of playoffs to go. But Brian, I'm curious to know, where's your head currently at with Tyler Toffoli? Because correct me if I'm wrong here. I know we talked about the trade. I think we talked about Toffoli again around the start of the playoffs after he had that great one. After he had that great run with the Canucks, like right at the end of the season before the pause. And I recall you saying something like, oh, well, we've seen him already for so long on LA and he's had such a long track record of being such like a less than 50 point guy for so long now that you didn't see yourself projecting Toffoli for more than like, around 60 points, even if he stays on Vancouver next season. Like, tell me, first of all, if I'm correct, that that's what you said. And then I'm curious, is that still how you feel? Because I don't know, it just seems like he's doing so well now that he's getting this top deployment. Clearly the coach likes him, like he's earning this top deployment, both the top line and top power play. I'd be really interested to see what he could do if he was on a team for a whole season that's actually like reasonably good at scoring, unlike the LA Kings, and if he was in this top deployment position. I feel like maybe there's an upside here that we need to be ready for.
For sure. So I don't think that you're characterizing my position. Well, like maybe that is what I said. I don't think it's what I meant or the full story of what I said. I think what I said was, well, we've seen him look great with Elias Pettersson, and Toffoli's clearly in a more offensive situation than he's ever been in before. I believe my answer about Toffoli's upside hinged and still hinges on exactly where Toffoli ends up next season. Needless to say, most situations are going to be better for Toffoli in an offensive way than what he had in Los Angeles, especially towards the end, like especially this last season and the one before it, where the team was really in the tank. But at age 28, it also could be tough for Tyler Toffoli to get started at this point in his career of being like a super offensive threat if he ends up not in the most ideal place, which would mean not on Elias Pettersson's wing. So I really I don't want to disappoint you, Elon. I have no deep thoughts here on Toffoli, other than I think what you would assume and most people would assume would be the case for him. I think Toffoli is going to be a product of his environment, upside for 55, 60 points in an okay scenario. And then beyond that, in one that is seemed as perfect as the one that he currently has in Vancouver.
Yeah, so I mean, we still have the rest of the playoffs. Then he's an unrestricted free agent. But I'm excited, Brian, because at some point you're going to have to put your money where your mouth is and actually, like, I don't know if that was the right idiom to use, but like at some point you're going to have to actually, like, if he signs with Vancouver, and now we know going into next season that he might spend the whole year or the large majority of it on the top line with Pettersson and on the top power play, we're going to have to pick a number. And I don't know, at this point, I feel like I'd be tempted to throw down like a big number, like 70, because Pettersson seems to only be getting better. And if Toffoli's going to play with him and JT Miller, like for the majority of the season, like, I don't know, sky's the limit for me.
If Toffoli plays with Pettersson, if Toffoli plays with Pettersson, I'll sign up for 70. That's not a problem for me. But if he ends up pretty much anywhere else, I wouldn't.
Okay, well, we'll see. Well, I mean, there's a lot of good situations in the league, but I guess I don't have to try to think of them right now. So then on the flip side, Toffoli came back. That meant that Brock Boeser was bumped from the top power play. He had 2 straight 2-assist games in the first round of the playoffs versus St. Louis. But after that, he's had a very quiet playoffs. Only 1 goal and 1 assist in his last 7 games going into today's game. So watch Boeser now like get a hat trick. But I don't know, like this is also after he ended his season, like before he got injured, with only 6 points in his final 15 games. So if you're a Boeser owner in like a dynasty league right now, I imagine you got to be pretty worried about this guy. Like imagine 2 years ago. Remember when Brock Boeser like broke out? I think it was Pettersson's rookie season, and Boeser was having this great year. He was on pace for like 40 goals before he got injured. Imagine telling someone 2 years ago, hey, guess what? In 2 years, the Canucks are going to be like in a playoff run, and Brock Boeser won't even be on the top power play. You think you're crazy, and you say, oh, and guess who will be on the top power play? It'll be Tyler Toffoli and JT Miller are going to be the guys ahead of him on the depth chart and getting that power play time. You think it's crazy, but here we are. That's the reality right now. I'm curious, like Brian, how worried should Brock Boeser owners be? Because this almost reminds me of an Alex DeBrincat situation in Chicago. Like he seems like a good player. We've seen like a great season out of him, but now it seems like he just keeps getting pushed farther and farther down. You can't get on the top power play. What kind of ceiling can you have?
Yeah, DeBrincat is a really good comparison. DeBrincat, by the way, is someone who keeps coming up in our new Discord server, which we have available to our patrons. So check it out, patreon.com/KeepingKarlsson if you want to get in on that, where there are conversations happening, man, over the summer, which is still hockey time, which is usually not the case. But if you want to still engage in hockey conversations with us. Anyway, Brock Boeser. Okay. If I have him in a keeper, I think I'm trying to unload him. It seems like he just can't keep his coach happy enough for him to get continued consistent opportunities to do what we hoped he would do coming into the league. I'm not sure if that's Boeser's fault or if it's his coach's, but we were looking at him before as a top flight asset who could score 35 goals without issue, hopefully more than 40. And the thing about Boeser is that his game has still been pretty good. Like all things equal, I wouldn't argue that Besser has taken a step back since his rookie season as a 20-year-old back in 2017-18, but I'd also argue that Brock Besser hasn't taken that step forward either. That would be the difference between a promising young talent and a blue chip offensive guy to roster in your lineups. So is Brock Besser being held back from achieving his true potential? Maybe. I wish I had a little more of the inside scoop here to know if he can't take the step himself, if Besser's not capable, or if it's because his coach or some other factor is depriving him of the opportunity to do so. But while I wait to find out and see how this story plays out, I don't necessarily want to sit with Besser on my roster either. So I guess if you do own him in a keeper format, don't give him up for nothing, right? He's still only going to be 23 next year. There's still a lot of things that can change and improve for Besser, but I would shop him and see if I can find someone willing to give me a similar return on Besser. And Elon, you're about to give me a reality check here, but a similar return on Besser to what I might have gotten 1 or 2 years ago at this time.
Why? Why would anyone do that? You can't recommend to people.
The Canucks.
You can't. Okay, you have to give real advice here. I asked you if people should be worried. You're saying to dump him. I'm thinking, wow, you're so down on Besser that you're saying even like sell low because now his value's at its lowest, and you're still saying you probably want to unload him while he still has some perceived value. But no, that's not what you're saying. You're saying no, sell him for his highest ever value that he ever had. That would be sure.
I'm saying shop around. Maybe if you're really lucky, you'll find someone who hasn't been paying attention. In all likelihood, everyone is okay. In all likelihood, everyone is paying attention. And you might. It's about how much risk you can stomach, right? This is going to be a managerial, personal choice. If I owned Besser in a keeper, I think I would be stubborn and hang on to him because I can't see his value sinking so much lower than it is right now. So I would rather keep him for another year, another 2 years, see if things start looking on the up and up. Because honestly, even if he does get buried a little bit with the emergence of Bo Horvat, maybe Besser doesn't get on that top power play or on a consistent basis, but at least he's got a center to play with no matter where he lands in the top 6 assumptively, and that hopefully he doesn't get kicked out of the top 6 and move to the third line, which I think we've seen happen or threaten to happen. Basically, I'm saying, look, be worried if you're a Besser owner, but the sky hasn't fallen quite yet. I'd hang on unless you can find a way to unload him that you think is really still nice in the return, but I wouldn't sell him at his lowest value.
Okay, interesting. So, yeah, I guess at this point, first of all, we don't know if Toffoli's actually coming back. So I guess obviously you could wait and see. Also, you could always say, well, he was injured. Like, who knows if he's like at 100% right now. Maybe that's the reason why they're playing other players in spots ahead of him and why he's like not getting so many points in these playoffs. Also, it's just a small sample size. So, yeah, it's a tricky situation, but it's, him and DeBrincat. I know you've been saying in our Discord, Brian, how like I still believe in DeBrincat's value and like, why not? It's just a bummer for him that like, what's his name? That Kirby Dach and Dominic Kubalik have both kind of gone ahead of him in the depth chart and are getting that good power play time. And like, we'll see now with Besser if he can get back to that good spot where he could potentially threaten for 40 goals again. Yeah, who knows? We'll talk about it more in the summer, obviously, but something to think about. I think these playoff episodes where we're just talking about the fantasy impact of like a few playoff games, it's more like food for thought. Here are the things I'm thinking right now while I'm watching these games. We don't need to come to any conclusions just yet. Though I guess the Penguins and the Leafs are coming to conclusions and making trades. So maybe people in their fantasy leagues are also deciding to make some trades. Anyway, on the other side of that series, we have the Golden Knights, and like Tyler Toffoli, we've got another guy who's greatly outperforming his LA days in Alec Martinez, who just keeps putting up points in these playoffs. His assist yesterday brought him out to 6 points in 8 games since the round robin, and that along with all the blocks, even a decent amount of shots, makes me so excited for him next season. I guess I'm going to be drafting with a lot of people who are listening to this podcast, which is a bit of a bummer, but I need to join like some new league because I feel like I'll be able to get Martinez pretty late, and I'm pretty high on him. I know, Brian, we just recently talked about him. We don't have to dig into him all again, but we did make that bet. I believe it was 2 episodes ago where we were deciding whether or not he'll be able to break 40 points next season. You said no. I just wanted to point out he's still doing well, but I'm guessing that nothing he does in this playoffs is going to change your mind in terms of your confidence in our bet that you're going to win this and he's going to be less than 40 points.
Yeah, no, I'm not about to buy in on him anymore. Honestly, I think 40 points, I bet was over under 39.5. That's generous for me. I think that gives me a lot of room for him to still have a decent offensive season and for me to still win the bet. So while if it were lower, if it were like 35 points, I might be sweating. I'm still not sweating about 40 points. Maybe like Tyler Toffoli, he also came from LA, Alec Martinez. Maybe he was also in a really crummy situation over the last couple of years, but even when LA was doing well, Martinez never really had big seasons. Toffoli never had big seasons either, but there was a little more promise there than I've ever seen from Martinez. So no, I'm not changing anything that I've said about him.
And even it doesn't even matter, right? Like no matter how many points he gets, let's say the Golden Knights go to the Cup Finals and he continues to be at this 0.75 points per game pace, well above let's say a 50-point pace for the playoffs. I'm not saying he's gonna do that next year, but no matter what you see this playoffs, you're gonna stick with this idea, right? You're saying what you've seen in LA, that tells you everything you need to know.
What I've seen over the course of Alec Martinez's career in LA, yes, I've seen what I'm confident I've seen what I need to know. But of course, Vegas is a great offensive team. It's not a bad place to be. It's a place that could make Nate Schmidt, who is a solid guy, solid two-way defender, sort of like Martinez, but Schmidt hasn't had a huge breakout either.
He's broken 40. Right? He's broken 40.
Yeah, he has, but I don't think Martinez has that in him still. Schmidt's always had this sort of speedy, nimble edit where he could do these things if you asked him to, but he's generally not.
Yeah, it's easy for me to be acting all cocky now because Martinez keeps getting points. But when the bet actually happens, too bad you didn't agree to stakes. If you ever feel you're so confident that you actually want to put something on this bet, I'd feel pretty good about it. But okay, another Golden Knight that we've got to talk about, Brian, is Alex Tuch, who's having himself a playoffs. He's scored a goal in 4 straight games now going into today. So we'll see if he can make it 5. He's doing all of this from the bottom 6 on a line with Nicholas Roy and Nick Cousins and only power play 2 deployment. We were talking about Besser, who's still on a decent even strength line, getting bumped from the top power play, only 2 points in however many games. Obviously, it's much nicer to be in Vegas because Alex Tuch in the bottom 6, he's crushing it. But this guy's a really good player. We've seen him do well before. If you recall, I think it was before they traded for who was Mark Stone. It was the season where they got Mark Stone before, and that bumped Alex Tuch down. I believe that's correct. Anyways, he was playing on a line with I think Paul Stastny and someone, and he was doing really well. And then this season, obviously, he didn't get that many points, but he didn't really get the opportunity. Now in the playoffs, even without the greatest opportunity, he's still stepping forward. Though again, it is obviously a very small sample size here. Do you see this as just a random streak, a la, I assume what you're thinking about Alec Martinez, or is this run raising Tuch's draft stock for you next season? Have you, during this playoffs, started thinking, wow, I think Tuch is even better than I thought he was going into this?
The only thing that could for sure raise Tuch's draft stock is for there to be a spot open in the top 6 for him, and that just doesn't seem to be the case, unfortunately. I would love for Alex Tuch to get in the top 6 and do what we've seen him do there before, but he's going to need an injury to get there because Stone, Pacioretty, Stastny, Karlsson, Smith, and Marchessault, all of them are signed for at least one more season. All of them except Stastny are signed for 2 more seasons beyond this one, and still a decent chunk. And all of them except Stastny are signed for 2 more seasons beyond this one, and I don't think Alex Tuch is going to shift to playing center. So I just worry that he's going to be waiting a long time to get his turn. I think it's actually more likely that, say, someone like Cody Glass comes up and centers line 3 and makes that that's a legit place to produce from. Still not the highest numbers that Tuch should conceivably get in a scoring position, but at least better than being on line 3 as it stands right now.
Okay, so you're kind of saying that what you've seen in these playoffs, again, it's not affecting you that much, which has always been your brand, I guess, because right now he's scoring goals from line 3, and now we're saying that maybe even line 3 will get better. So maybe he could just be a big goal scorer even from here. But I guess that's pretty rare to happen in the NHL, is what you're saying, for a player in the bottom 6 to be a 20, 30 goal scorer.
It's pretty rare. I don't know how far we'd have to go back. I feel like someone like Michael Grabner is probably the best example. Just pulling that out of nowhere, thinking that it's true. Pulling up his numbers now. Yeah, he had 27 goals for the Rangers in 2016-17. But I'm confident almost a huge chunk of those were empty netters. So, and he also had a couple shorthanded ones too. So yeah, I just, it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen.
Yeah. Okay, Brian, how about this? Okay, Gohol Lywood on what is this on YouTube here is saying a Tuch could replace Stastny, and of course you said that Tuch doesn't play center, but theoretically, right? Marchessault, I believe, has played center before, or at least I know that he was center left wing eligible in fantasy. So that's how I know about what positions hockey players play. So couldn't they have Karlsson and Marchessault as the two centers and then get Tuch to replace Stastny, and Stastny goes down to the bottom six? Maybe he plays with Cody Glass, and all of a sudden they're like, I think that there's room. It could happen.
It could happen. Of course it could happen. I don't know the last time like that Marchessault has played center. And by the way, you keep calling this listener, thank you for joining us live, Go Hole Leewood, but like you take out the underscore and it's Go Hollywood, which I think might be easier to say.
Well, why does he have the underscore right there in the middle?
I don't know why they do.
Please
also,
tell us.
By the way, Go Hollywood also asked earlier, or mentioned earlier, that Besser might be a good player to buy low on. Elon, what do you think of that? I don't think, like I said, I wouldn't sell low, but I'm not sure I'd buy low on him.
Which isn't a consistent way to play, right? Like you either have to think, like, unless you're just saying you don't know and you're just going to use this like a sunk cost fallacy. You're kind of saying, if I have him, I might as well just hold on because I've already had him this whole time. Like, anyways, I'm on the side that I wouldn't buy low. I know like it seems like he should be, since like now he's doing the worst he's doing, but I was kind of with you before you at the end were like, oh no, but you could trade him for like, you know, Sidney Crosby or someone. But like, I do think that I'd be concerned. So also like with the injury history also. So I don't know, which hasn't been his fault, by the way, but it could be playing an effect. What were we talking about? Oh yeah, Alex Tuch. Anyways, we'll see, right? I think that he's someone that we'll see what he does next year. And I agree with you that the deployment will play a big role, but he's looking good. He's definitely doing his best to earn a job, right? And to get more time because, yeah, he's having a great series. And also, on the other hand, why would Vegas change up the lines? They're clearly an amazing team. They may win the cup this year. They're doing so well. So it's probably good for them to have a great player like Alex Tuch on their third line. So
for sure, it's a great way to build a Stanley Cup contender. Unfortunately for Alex Tuch, not a great way to build a resume.
Yeah. And then I guess also on Vegas, Robin Lehner. I don't know. What is there to say? He's great. He's doing so well. Have we got a starter? It's 8:30 p.m. Eastern time right now. I believe their game starts in a couple hours. Do we know who's starting tonight? It is interesting. Like, I guess the Glenner's coming off a shutout yesterday. He didn't have a huge workload. On the other hand, maybe you still want to rest him and get Fleury in. So we'll see what happens. Really funny, that whole thing with this tweet by Alan Walsh where Fleury had a knife in his back just because Lehner got game one, which proved to be a very smart decision because he's proving to be one of like the better goalies. Maybe, I think, Brian, you even dropped that you think the best goalie in the league right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, what does Alan Walsh want? But I guess to try to guilt the team into playing Fleury, even though Lehner's been better.
I guess so. I mean, Alan Walsh has always been someone who's really outspoken looking after his clients. And I think he was one of the earliest and still one of the biggest, probably the biggest Twitter presence in terms of NHL agents. And he's never been shy to rattle cages to try and draw some attention and put some pressure on an organization. So I guess this was that, but it was all super weird, right? Like the picture with Fleury with the sword through his back, like on the whole was just a bizarre choice to make. Like, first off, to choose to create that, and second, to put it out into the world thinking it would solve a problem. I mean, message sent. Maybe Vegas got a little push and saying, hey, look after my client, because Alan Walsh has some leverage here, right? He has a ton of clients, a ton of high profile NHL players in his agency. So he has some swing about where players play. Wow. So it was like a warning shot from Alan Walsh, but seemed totally unnecessary. I think there was a narrative where Marc-Andre Fleury had been mistreated by an organization that he basically started single-handedly. You know, he was their star player coming in. It was telegraphed a year in advance that Fleury was going to be the face of the franchise, and he's given his all to the team. But when it comes down to it, the best players should play. So yeah. I don't think there's much doubt about whether who the better chance to win with lies between Fleury and Lehner. Fleury can win a cup. He can have a couple great games. He can have a string of good games, great games, but he's more prone to blowing up than Robin Lehner is. I'd have Robin Lehner in my night 10. I would rather have Robin Lehner in my net 10 nights out of 10.
Yeah, of course. Unless maybe he needs a rest, and that's why you have Fleury in there. So just a kind of a weird, funny situation. And obviously with Lehner as a UFA this summer, it's like, on one hand, yeah, Fleury could think, okay, good, now it'll be my net again. But also, why wouldn't Vegas try to bring Leonard back if they could fit him in? Because it's worked out very well for him. And Fleury obviously had a bit of a rough year. Anyways, let's switch over to, I guess, the Islanders-Phillies series. They're playing right now. I guess that's the tricky thing. Normally, when we're recording these podcasts, we have a whole week of action and so many games. And here we just have these few series. So we're talking about games that are happening. So who knows how much of what we'll say will be out of date. But at this point right now, the series is 2-1 for the Islanders after they seem to have a pretty easy time beating Philly yesterday 3-1 to take that 2-1 series lead. Man, this Islanders team, Brian, don't get mad at me because I'm wearing the hat and talking up the Islanders. They knocked off the Panthers and the Capitals with relative ease, right? Only losing one game in each of those series. Now they're doing very well against the top-seeded Philadelphia Flyers. And here's a pretty wild tidbit. Like through the 3 games, so before today, the Islanders, they've scored some goals, right? They've scored 4, 3, and 3 goals in the 3 games. And yesterday was the first game where one player had more than 1 point in the game. Jordan Eberle had 2 assists. That was the first multi-point effort for any Islander in the series so far. This is like a full team effort type of team. Like just you look at the box score after the game and you've got like 10 different people who've gotten points in a 4-goal game. And yes, I guess if we're going to put the spotlight on someone, there's a lot of people we could talk about since everyone's been getting points on this team. I don't really want to talk about Varlamov. We already have. He's obviously doing a great job. Let's not talk about Barzal because we already know he's amazing. What is there even to say? I guess we should mention that Anders Lee has now pulled a bit of an Alex Tucker. He's scored in 3 straight games going into today. He'll try to match Tuck's 4 today. Lee now has scored in 6 of his last 8 games, finally taking advantage of all the time he gets playing with Matt Barzal. It was so weird that Barzal had a good season this past year, but Lee only around 50 points. In the past couple seasons, he's paced around 50 points, 25 goals, 50 points-ish. Have you seen anything in this playoffs from Lee to indicate that maybe this could still change? And again, we have an offseason. I had that really fun interview with Arthur Staple where he suggested the Islanders should be in the hunt for like a Taylor Hall to get like a real all-star winger for Barzal. But assuming that doesn't happen and Anders Lee is back as the top power play left winger to Barzal, you'd think he should have more in him, right? But he hasn't in the regular season. He's having good playoffs.
He is. And I've been a believer in Anders Lee for a long while now. And I'm not saying that to sound smart all of a sudden because now he's doing well in the playoffs, which doesn't prove anything. I'm not about to cherry pick the guys who I would be right on based on their playoff performances staying true. But Lee has always had these big fluctuations in shooting percentage since breaking out back in the 16-17 season. And the reason Lee is doing well now is his shooting percentage is back in a healthy range. The trouble with projecting Anders Lee in the past has been that his shooting percentage never looks unreasonably low or high. Like right now, he's shooting at 14% these playoffs, which is the bottom end of where he's landed the 3 seasons before this one. But his shooting percentage has sometimes been high enough to be like, oh yeah, he could be that high guy. And then it's been low enough to be like, oh yeah, he could be that low a guy too. But it's never been in a way that looks so unsustainable that we're like, oh no, this can't be the real Anders Lee. So here we are seeing Anders Lee succeed at shooting again, which is lovely. And it means that I still like him as a mid-50s kind of player. I can't say this is a change in anything I've said before, but I can say that his playoff performance has definitely rekindled some of my dwindling faith in Anders Lee getting back up to his 60-point upside. But of course, Barry Trotz is the coach of the Islanders, which makes it hard to really call anyone other than one guy to be a 60-plus point player. And that one guy is Matt Barzal, not Anders Lee, which puts him back in the 55-ish point range for me.
Yeah, I guess the thing is that Barzal maybe has more upside. I always kind of think of it as like, Barzal could still maybe be like an 80, 90-point player even under Barry Trotz. And then how could Anders Lee not like kind of get pulled up a bit with him? So we'll see. Yeah, I remember in that interview, it was like pretty clear that Anders Lee isn't someone who we should expect to be able to have a full consistent season being more than like a 25, 50-point guy, which is really good anyways, but maybe Barzal could pull him higher. And yeah, if his shooting percentage works out, I guess when someone gets a lot of their points through goals, that means that they are going to have a lot of variance pulling them one way or the other. So all it takes is like one good stretch of a bit of a lucky shooting percentage. And all of a sudden we're talking about 30 goals, 35 goals. And then that kind of changes everything. So who knows, maybe this is going to be the start of a run that goes into a big season for Anders Lee. So someone to watch. Always great in fantasy because he takes a lot of shots. He hits. So, you always like these multi-cat guys that can score goals, which you don't see right now on Philly as much with the way the Islanders have been shutting them down. Claude Giroux and Travis Konecny continuing to underwhelm anyone who bet big on them in their playoff pools. Between them, the number of goals they have, so I'm going to take all the goals at Giroux, has scored. Then I'm going to take all the goals that Konechny has scored. I'm going to add them up. I'm going to carry 0 goals. No goals from either of these supposed like all-star players in 12 playoff games. They have 5 and 4 assists respectively. I'm curious like who I should be more concerned about, or maybe you could just say neither because you'll say that don't worry about playoff games. But like Giroux's coming off a 63-point season. So he was already having a down year compared to what we usually see from him, and now he's continuing that into the playoffs. Then you have Konechny, who had a breakout season, 61 points in 66 games. It's a 76-point pace, but he's found himself, just like he's found himself bumped from the top power play, just like Brock Boeser, right? So it's been Konechny on the second line, and the second power play is playing with Kevin Hayes, who's having a good playoffs himself. But like Konechny, like I said, no goals, and now his deployment is falling. So should people be worried about Konechny? Like I would be right now, like though I'd rather buy low on him than Brock Boeser, but I'm curious to see what you think.
Yeah, I'm not so worried about Konechny, but oh man, the Flyers looked unstoppable going into the playoffs, and now they're in their second straight series of having no solution when up against an airtight defensive team that just seems to be squeezing all their creativity and firepower out of them, which, to the Flyers' credit is it's hard to play against teams like that. I don't hold it all against them. So I'm not going to draw any conclusions long-term on guys like Konechny and Giroux. You put them against 25 other teams in the league, and I think you'd see them come alive the way they had been since the calendar turned to 2020. I will, though, sort of share what's after saying all that. I'm going to mention an unfair stat that illustrates just how sad things are for Philly right now. And it's about Claude Giroux, who's had 3 playoff appearances. This is 3rd over the last 5 seasons. And they all add up to 24 playoff games going into the night we're recording this. And in those 24 playoff games, Claude Giroux has 1 single goal. That's it. And only 8 assists to go with it. So when your captain, when your leader is only getting that much accomplished, it's hard to imagine how you can have a whole lot of success as a team. This is not to put down Giroux. I can't remember. I think one of those playoffs he might have been injured. He had good record in the playoffs before that. So this is not me saying, oh, Giroux can't score when it matters. It's just saying, look, Philly is just being trashed right now, and they're bread and butter. Like they can play offensive and just being trashed right now. Philly's bread and butter is their ability to play a two-way game. But when you're just up against these defensive powerhouses, 2 of the best in the league, especially when Carey Price is on his game, Dallas is the only other team that really comes to mind aside from the Islanders and what we saw Montreal do in terms of just being able to shut you down. It looks like they've just met their match and run into a wall. And it's really unfortunate because we were so excited about so many of their players going into these playoffs. Couturier, Konechny, Giroux, Voracek was coming back. Provorov was starting to come on too. So it's Kevin Hayes. I could keep naming Flyers and be like, why aren't they scoring? But we know why. So I'm not coming up with any long-term. I don't think this is going to affect any of my projections for them next season.
Okay, so yeah, I think buy low on Konechny if you can right now, if Konechny owners are worried, because you could just blame it on their opponents. Also, Brian, a little harsh. They've been trash. Like they did win that series against Montreal. So
sorry. I meant they've been. I thought I said they've been trashed. Yeah.
Okay, I get you. Okay, so let's switch over now to this Dallas-Colorado series. So I wrote up my little prep here before the game started. Looks like the game's just about to end. Dallas is up 5-4, and I'm seeing 4 seconds left. So I'm assuming this game is over, which means Dallas goes up 3-1, which is very surprising because I thought Colorado was one of the most dominant teams. Yeah, okay, now I'm seeing the game's over. Colorado was so dominant in the regular season and then in their first round of the playoffs versus Arizona. Maybe that just now, looking back, that just said more about Arizona than Colorado, because right now Dallas, they're totally changed their game. It's wild to see the Stars go from being this defensive team who you just compared to the Islanders. Now they just won 5-4. So they had the ability. Maybe they had this ability the whole time. Like maybe throughout the season when we were wondering, like, why are Sagan and Radulov and Ben and all these like high scoring players like not getting points? Why is Dallas winning all these like 2-1 games? Maybe that was a choice that they made. Maybe the coach. I'm just totally like spitballing here, Brian. So feel free to bring me back to reality. But maybe it's like they had these talented players, but they figured that their best way to win games would be to try to keep the score low because they're also very good defensively. And then now, since they were against Colorado, who's such a powerhouse, they had to unleash their offensive stars, and it seems to be working. They're now up 3-1. They've scored a ton of goals in this series. And I don't know. Now I'm very curious, Brian. It's your least favorite type of series. It's 3-1. So for you, it's probably over. You're not even going to watch the rest of it. But yeah, like, Colorado's in a lot of trouble. And to add to it, like Grubauer being injured, I thought was like, not great. It's like Tuukka Rask leaving for Boston, not great. But hey, they have a good backup. Pavel Francouz, he's supposed to be a really good player. He had a solid season, but his last 3 games before today, he had yet to surpass a 900 save percentage. And today, he let in 5 goals on 26 shots, and he looks like he got pulled. Michael Hutchinson, who even knew that Hutchinson was the third stringer on Colorado? I didn't, but he played and made 3 saves on 3 shots. So we'll see what happens for the next game. But yeah, Francouz, I don't know if we need to blame him or if we need to blame the team overall or just give all the credit to Dallas. But this is not going the way I expected.
No, definitely not. I need to edit my take, by the way, on the 3-1 series. It was more for like not this round. This round, I believe Boston's down, Colorado's down. I think they both have a legit chance. But last round, the teams down 3-1 didn't have a chance. So that's what made it so boring. It was just get it over with.
Okay.
Okay.
I could ask you a specific question if you want, because I sort of just was
no, that's okay. I actually, is there like a Rocky analogy here for Dallas? Like, was Ivan Drago, correct me if I'm wrong, but was he just like this steely-faced dude who, could just sop up any attempts at attacking, and then when it came time, he could unload? Do I have that wrong?
From what I recall about Ivan Drago, and it's been a few years since I've seen this movie, I think he was the type where he was so powerful. Like there was this like special technology that they invented like just for him, and he punched the thing, and it like registered the punch was so strong that it should like kill someone from one punch. So he was like winning his matches. Like his matches were like 1 minute, because he would just punch the guy once, and the guy would probably explode because of how strong these punches were. So then like Rocky though was able to take these punches like 100 of them, like 1,000 of them, and just keep on getting up. And that's why, because Rocky has he has that American can-do attitude where you just keep coming back from all of these punches. And so then Drago I guess started to get a little tired, or it was like a new type of match for him that he wasn't used to, because he was used to winning these things around in. I think the same thing happened actually with Clubber Lang in Rocky 3. I think that's maybe the a common thread in this series after the first 2 movies, where obviously what was that guy's name? The guy who ended up, no spoilers, but what was the name of the guy that Rocky fought in the first 2 Rocky movies?
Apollo Creed.
Apollo Creed, yeah. I think Apollo Creed had some real serious boxing matches that had gone along with other people, but it seemed like Clubber Lang and Ivan Drago just knocked people out really quickly. So back to hockey.
I'm wondering
does that mean I agree with you or no?
Well, I was going to say that Dallas would be him, but now that you describe it, I feel like that's the Colorado analogy here, is a team that could just have their way with anyone. And now that they're being met with some resistance in Dallas, a team that seems to be able to deflect some of these strong attacks that have just knocked out every other team in the league, Colorado's a little shaken and not sure what to do with it. It is super weird, though, that Dallas is all of a sudden scoring goals. And it's unnerving to me because I have wanted this to happen for so long, and I finally gave up on it. And now I'm like, no, this can't be. I can't go back down a Dallas scoring rabbit hole and try to understand now, once I finally got comfortable with them, why are they only scoring 1 or 2 goals so many nights, and why are their main stars doing nothing? Now I have to rethink this whole thing. It's very frustrating, and I'm not happy about it. So I'm not going to rethink it until I need to. But I will say that heading into tonight's game, it seems like Colorado has had the quantity, but Dallas has been finding the quality. And I think that's also how the season went for them. Colorado's had a 55% share of shot attempts at even strength, but Dallas has had a 55% share of the expected goals at even strength, which is usually not how this goes, right? Usually the team with the more shot attempts has the more expected goals, but it's a pretty big disparity between the 2 teams and what they're actually being able to throw towards their opponent's net. So Dallas is really looking good, and now looking all of a sudden not all of a sudden. I think they were on our radars for a Stanley Cup winning team this year anyway, but I don't think we ever saw the Avs being down in a 3-1 hole.
Yeah, and I would have assumed if they were down a 3-1 hole, it would be because they lost a bunch of games 2-1 or something, not 5-4 like these games have been. And also, by the way, Dallas is kind of pulled in Islanders. Like they're also kind of scoring by committee. Like going into today, it was 3 games into the series, and Jamie Benn was leading the team with 3 points in 3 games. Then Gurianov, Perry, Lindell, Sagan, Haskin, and Radulov all with 2 points. So again, it was like a lot of players with 1 point. And you look today, now Klingberg's finally gotten on the board in the series. He had a couple points today. And it looks like today Dallas has been getting points from Radek Faksa, who had a goal and 2 assists, and Rupe Hintz. So it's like they're also like they're spreading the offense around, which is very different than Colorado, right? Who basically you've got, McKinnon, Landeskog, Kadri, and Rantanen. Did I leave out Rantanen? Yeah, and Rantanen. They have their big 4 forwards. They've got Makar on defense, and no one else had really been doing anything going into
Nichushkin with 2 goals today.
Yeah, so today I guess Nichushkin and Burakovsky start coming out of nowhere and picking up some points for their fantasy owners, but they might be out of the playoffs soon, and they won't be able to produce it all for their owners. So interesting how these teams are working differently. It seems so far, at least from the Islanders and Dallas, if you're able to spread the scoring all throughout your lineup, maybe you have more success, or maybe that's just 2 examples, and there's probably a lot of counter examples. So we had a question here from patron Fred. We're big fans of Fred. He's been around for a while, so thank you so much for asking this question. You wanted to talk about Denis Gurianov, who's had a great playoffs, right? He had that crazy 4-goal, 1-assist game in the last round versus Calgary. He's had a nice series this time. He's not getting the highest minutes. And so Fred asked, like, he's seen 4th-line minutes, but he's still doing well. What do you think his upside is? I took a look, at least for today and the last game, Gurianov's been playing on, I think, what we would classify as a second line with Pavelski and Janmark behind Sagan, Radulov, Benn. So Dallas has gone and loaded up their top line. Then, of course, they've got that Faxa, Cogliano, Como line that I think is getting less minutes this series, which, again, I think goes to my theory that Dallas is deciding to play things differently this time and not shut things down so much. Anyways, Gurianov had a good season, right? Good rookie season, and he's having a smart playoffs. He's 23 years old. At this point, is it reasonable to call him a sleeper for next year, or maybe is the cat out of the bag and maybe even he'll be overrated going into next year? I'm curious to know, at this point, what are your thoughts on Gurianov? I recall in our Sean Shapiro interview, I asked him, like, specifically Rupe Hintz versus Gurianov, who has the more offensive upside, and he said Gurianov right then. And so far, I guess Gurianov is having the more exciting playoffs. So yeah, what's your current take? Do you think he's someone that you would try to grab as like a potential 50-point threat next year, or do you think that's shooting too high?
We actually had a really interesting conversation on our Facebook group that started with a question about Gurianov, but then went into what does it mean to be a sleeper anymore? Usually if you start naming someone a sleeper with all the sort of the echo chamber of hockey news and fantasy sites and sources, a guy who's a sleeper become someone who can quickly get overrated and reached for in a draft because you want to be the one, or you're in leagues with people who want to be the one to say, oh yeah, I'm going to be the cool guy to jump and reach for Denis Gurianov. Don't you worry about it. I know who this guy is, and he's going to have a great season, and I'm going to look brilliant for doing it, for grabbing him where I did. So that's another conversation, but it's an interesting piece to consider when we talk about if someone's a sleeper. Can that even really exist anymore? But in terms of like trying to understand the essence of that question, which is, do you think he's someone who's not on a lot of people's radars who might be able to double his output next year, or be someone who's really fantasy relevant? Of course, right? Of course, there's a good chance. The thing I don't love about his playoff performance is that he only has 2 assists in 12 games so far, and his 7 goals have come on just 30 shots, which means he's scoring on about a quarter of the shots he takes. This isn't so dissimilar to his regular season, where he had only 9 assists and his 20 goals came on 130 shots, which is about a 15% shooting rate, which would be reasonable. But the fact that he's not piling up a bunch of assists to go with his goals is concerning for me, and that limits what his upside could possibly be. So that to me feels like he could probably max out at 50 points unless something big about his deployment or usage changes, or the way Dallas plays hockey, which like projecting someone like Anders Lee or anyone on LA in the last few years, you need to account for the fact that Dallas doesn't win by scoring goals. They win by shutting you out, waiting for you to make a mistake, and then taking advantage. So this is not a high scoring team. It's a team where Benn, Sagan, and Radulov were fantasy irrelevant for large stretches of the season. It's a big hope to think that Denis Gurianov is going to reward you on your fantasy roster for 82 games.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird to hear you saying that after Dallas has scored whatever it is, like 15 goals so far.
I know.
But like, yeah, you're right that there's no way to know if this is going to carry forward. And I think what you said there that really hit me is, yeah, most of these points are goals. I think we said the same thing about Anders Lee, right? Most of these points are goals. And so if that shooting percentage goes the other way, all of a sudden he's disappointing you. And you know how like NHL coaches could be, you know, like all of a sudden the player's just having some bad shooting luck, then, you know, then they put him down the lineup to shake things up. And then all of a sudden maybe his opportunity goes down. And Dallas obviously does have a lot of people who could bump Gurianov out of the top 6. So I think I'm going to agree with you. I think that it's very exciting right now. And now at this point, to me, overrated, but like, you know, long term, this guy's got a lot of talent, and he could be like a Kubalik next year, you know, and just keep scoring goals. And if he could keep that shooting percentage up, then anything could happen. But that's, you don't really want to bank on that. Like, it's not the safest way to play. That's kind of what you're saying, right, Brian?
Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't reach for Denis Gurianov, especially with that appeal of reaching for someone and being the knowledgeable one at the table. I'd still be interested in him, but I wouldn't want to make a full, like, pick him in a spot where I'd be picking a player that I'm making a full season commitment to. At least not yet. We'll see what the offseason brings. I'm open to changing my mind.
Yeah, and the rest of the playoffs, right? It looks like Dallas might move forward, and we might see another 4, maybe 8, 12 games out of this guy, depending on how things go. Yeah, at this point, I wonder if some other players on Dallas, like Gurianov, is going to get all the hype, and then people like Radulov and Benn maybe fall. And obviously, we're not as high on them as we once were, but Benn's having himself a nice playoffs, which I think is, again, what kind of like what Sean Shapiro called. He said Benn would be good if he didn't have to play so often. You've got to have long rest. So obviously, he had the long rest of the pause, and now he's coming in strong for these playoffs. So I wonder if next year in your draft, you let someone else take Gurianov, and then you grab like Radulov later on, or Jamie Benn, and, you know, maybe they also will disappoint you for stretches.
This is like my Besser advice. Do you think you think people are going to take Gurianov over Benn and Radulov?
I wouldn't be so surprised. I mean, okay, it's a good, I don't know. I'm interested. I'd be interested in what the listeners think. I'll bet you people in keeper leagues would be interested in Gurianov. That obviously depends how deep the keeper league is. That's different, of course. But like, I'd be curious to know, because, you know, Benn and Radulov are on the downswings, right? Like, they just had really terrible seasons. I think Gurianov was equal to Benn and Radulov this season. I'd have to bring up the numbers. I don't think he was necessarily like that much worse than them. And I think people are assuming Gurianov is like on the uptrend, and Benn and Radulov, I should say, are continuing to go on the downtrend. So I know we'll look at some draft results next year. Maybe Brian, take a note. And let's look at some draft results next year and see who's getting drafted higher. Because right now I hear a lot of people talking about Gurianov. No one asked us to talk about, is Jamie Benn going to be able to keep this up this year? I think people are assuming Jamie Benn won't be able to keep this up next year, and he'll be the same as he was this year, which was not especially impactful.
Yeah, but still better than Gurianov, who was not better than Radulov or Jamie Benn.
Not by much, right? Give me the numbers.
39 and 69 for Jamie Benn, 34 and 60 for Radulov, and 29 and 64 for Gurianov. So, like a fair, like not a huge gap, but a gap.
Like 5 points here or there. Yeah, okay. A gap. But again, what I'm saying is I think people are assuming that Benn and Radulov continue to go down. We'll have that conversation in the summer. We'll see how the rest of the playoffs go. Okay, let's switch over to that last series, Boston versus Tampa Bay. I think we've talked about the other ones. Got to give more props to Tom Crowhurst, who we mentioned at the top of the show, who we did that draft last week, and he's crushing it right now. He's currently winning our KKPP division, in a big part due to his huge hit on Andre Palat, who he got in round 6, which maybe you would have thought was a bit of a reach, but Palat's crushing it. He has 6 points in 4 games versus Boston. He's been taking full advantage. I don't know if people realize Palat's been on the top line and the top power play, playing with Kucherov in point, so it's a beautiful spot to be in, and he's racking up the points. It's very annoying, Brian. I took Kucherov 3rd overall in that draft, and every time Kucherov gets a point, and I think, oh great, I'm going to make some ground on Tom. No, like, Palat gets a point on the same point as Kucherov, so it's nothing. It's like all evens out to me still being behind. Very frustrating. Brian, do you have any explanation for how Palat can be like so good for these stretches and then always disappear? Like, this has been going on forever. He's kind of like a Jamie Benn. I feel like he's good when he's rested, maybe, but then you can't rely on him to put up consistent production anymore. Is that kind of the thing with Palat, or are we seeing something new? Because I mean, he's 29 years old now, and he's done this before, but I wouldn't be surprised if Palat disappears at some point in this playoffs again. But right now, man, anyone who grabbed him in their playoff pools are loving life.
For sure. I actually really like that Jamie Benn comparison, because like Ben, he is physical. He's not quite Jamie Benn's age, but he's a couple years younger, but he's still up there. He's getting to the point where, you can't necessarily use your body. Like, Andre Palat threw 145 hits this season in 69 games as a 28-year-old. He threw 146 hits as a 22-year-old also. That season he had 59 points. I'm not saying hits and points are correlated here, but I think there's a difference between what a 22 and what a 28-year-old can accomplish still and how their body will feel after throwing the same amount of hits. So, I think there is something to that. I think it's an interesting thought. And you look at how healthy Palat has been in the last few seasons. This was actually his healthiest season for a while. The season prior, 64 games. The season prior, 56 games. He played every game or just about every game this season, which just goes to say that I do think that the style of hockey he plays might not lend itself well to being fully healthy and capable offensively the whole way through. So it's great that he's making a name for himself again in these playoffs, and he seems to be doing it in a reasonably sustainable way. I don't think we should overlook necessarily either the kind of opportunity consistently that he's getting now, which I think it's been a while since he's had this kind of consistent opportunity at 5-on-5. Like, actually, I take that back. I'm looking at who he played with this year. It was like Point and Kucherov for 70% of the season, and he did so little with him. So yeah, I don't know, Elon, why he's such an up and down, a hit and miss kind of guy, but it's really nice to have him when he hits.
Yeah. And he's the kind of guy that you probably want to have on your fantasy team in a multi-category league because he helps you there. And for next year, I don't know. Like, obviously, I don't think he'll be overrated in drafts. Also, a lot of people will just assume that, because Stamkos is gone, that's why Palat is getting this opportunity, which might be the case. Like you said, that he played a lot with Kucherov and Point at even strength. But, on the power play, maybe he would get bumped by Stamkos, or maybe Alex Killorn would. Like, who knows? Tampa switches that around every once in a while. But yeah, it's been fun to watch. And Palat's had a very interesting career. I think we've been talking about him ever since season 1 of keeping Karlsson back in 2014. Palat and Tyler Johnson have been on our radar. Now Johnson has more so disappeared. Palat, here he is, one of the top performers in the playoffs so far. Another guy who throws the body around on Tampa that we got to mention is Blake Coleman, who was such a stud for his fantasy owners in New Jersey this season. If you recall, Blake Goldman, as some people were calling him, he kept on scoring, plus all the shots and the hits. He was really winning weeks for me in the cupful. Then he got traded to Tampa Bay and everything went downhill. He stopped getting points. He stopped even throwing as many shots on net. And so, yeah, he kind of assumed, okay, well, on New Jersey, he was a bigger fish in a smaller pond, and on Tampa, he's not going to have an impact. Well, hey, Blake Coleman having himself a playoffs as well. He's woken up. He has 5 points in his last 6 games from his line 3 spot with Barclay Goodrow and Yanni Gourde. He's been taking over 3 shots per game on the regular to get that sweet DraftKings bonus that you get for having 3+ shots, plus 6 hits or more. Plus, he's had games with 6 hits, a whole bunch of them. So he's also producing across the stat sheet. Brian, I've already been talking Vincent Trocheck over these playoffs, so I might as well keep it up. Blake Coleman, he's better than Trocheck for fantasy next year, right? Even though Coleman's a third liner, probably so is Trocheck, and I think I'd be drafting Coleman ahead of Trocheck.
Yeah, I mean, it would be fair to have given up on Vincent Trocheck ever getting a chance and saying, maybe Blake Coleman can still get a chance. But Elon, I'm gonna remind you of these numbers. I want to know if it changes your mind that Coleman had just 1 point in 9 games when he was traded to the Lightning.
Yeah,
does that change anything? Okay.
So I read an interview, and again, who knows? But hockey's a game played by people, right? So I think you were responding to a tweet by Sean Shapiro actually about this. Hockey is a game played by people, and you want to know, you want to see what they're thinking, what they're saying, and Blake Coleman, I think I saw him say that he had a bit of a tough time adjusting when he arrived in a new system. He had to learn, and maybe it's just that's how it works. The same thing happened, I think, when Mark Stone went to Vegas. He didn't get a lot of points when he first arrived. That might be wrong. I don't know. But you know what I mean? Maybe Coleman now has adjusted. He's got his spot on the third line. Now he's back to taking his 3+ shots per game. He's throwing all the hits. And obviously he has to get lucky to get these goals. But I don't know. Maybe I'm not saying he's going to be huge next year, but I'm also not big on Trocheck. So I think Coleman could be a good bet for 20 goals, 20 assists, and then a good number of shots and a great number of hits. And he's a really valuable guy to have on your fantasy team.
For sure. If Coleman and Trocheck are both on the third line, I'll go with Coleman. If Trocheck's on his second line, I might be more interested in him. Just get Coleman also. I gave you the crap. Sorry. I gave you the regular season cut of those numbers, but even to start the playoffs, Coleman just had 1 point in his first 6 games in the round robin and first round of the playoffs. So I don't know. I think you might be putting a lot of weight into these recent games, but we have seen that Blake Coleman is capable. Honestly, I could see him being very much like Andre Palat. These are the types of guys, by the way, who make playoff teams Stanley Cup contenders and champions, right? If you're getting production from your third line, if you're getting production from guys who didn't chip in during the regular season, but all of a sudden it's like found money in the playoffs, that's fantastic. It's just hard to say whether it's because they've improved or that it's anyway sustainable. Like for Palat, his ups and downs all the time just feel like variance. This feels like the same thing for him. Coleman, probably a similar story. I mean, look back to Anthony Cirelli having a great playoffs a couple years ago with Tampa. That still hasn't panned out to be a huge fantasy value piece. Oh my God, sorry. That still hasn't panned out to be a huge win in fantasy hockey for Anthony Cirelli. So the same thing could just happen to Coleman. Cirelli's a third liner. Coleman's a third liner. There just might not be room for them to produce where they are for a full season. To be honest, I'd prefer Guryanov to either one of them, but I'm sure you wouldn't argue with me there either.
Yeah, well, then it comes down to like, what categories you care about and things like that. But yeah, Guryanov has the more offensive upside. And yeah, I don't disagree with anything you're saying. I don't even know if I necessarily agree with Coleman greater than Trocheck. I would need to think about it. I was just, I was cobbling together a show for us to do today, and that's a thought that came to my mind. But yeah, you're right. Tampa Bay, they lost Steven Stamkos, which is a huge loss, and they've loaded up their top line, which is basically just Kucherov and Point. Like when you think, you assume that Tampa's this like high-powered team with so many superstars, but really it's like Point and Kucherov, and that's it for the forwards. And then you've got Hedman obviously on defense, and then it's just a bunch of like just really solid players like Palat. Like you said, we've got a line of Killorn, Tyler Johnson, and Anthony Cirelli, which is obviously doing well. Coleman, Gaudreau, Yanni Gourde, and then even the fourth line, you've got Pat Maroon. I don't know if people remember that he's there. Pat Maroon's kind of like the what's his name? Zach Bogosian of the defense, right? Like Zach Bogosian.
The offense.
Of the forwards. Like, that this guy's been around forever. Now he happens to be on Tampa, and now these guys might win cups. And you're like, okay, I guess this is where you're going to do it. So yeah, this is a strong team, and I agree with you, and I would love to see them against my Islanders in the next round and see if the Islanders could shut down this high-powered Tampa Bay offense. That's how it's looking like it might go. They're like, I don't know, let's give a mid-game update as we are wont to do on the podcast. 0-0 after the first, Philly and the Islanders. So who knows? Maybe Philly will be able to get a win here. So I guess on the Boston side of this series, I'd imagine, Brian, when I was seeing these tweets, I thought of you being very mad about it. The Bruins fans are hating on Yaroslav Halak because he put up 2 straight sub-900 save percentage games, let in a couple soft goals. You look at the replay, like, oh, maybe he could have had that. And people are like, oh, you can't rely on Halak. If Rask was there, we'd be doing better. Though, I mean, would also help the Bruins if they could score more than 1 goal per game. I don't know if you could really blame these losses on Halak. Like when you lose 7-1, yeah, you could blame the goalie, but though I guess then people say that, oh, but you lose all the momentum when your goalie lets in a goal. Anyway, obviously we're not going to read into Halak having a couple bad games, but at the same time, why can't the Bruins score goals? Is it just Tampa's doing so well, or like, what do you think is going to happen here? Who's more likely? Let's put it this way. Boston or Colorado? Who's more likely to come back from their 3-1 deficit in your mind?
I'll go Boston, just because I think Dallas can really, like I said earlier, just squeeze everything out of a team. So I just don't, or no, I said that about the Islanders, but Dallas can do it too. So I think Dallas can probably lock it down better than Tampa against Colorado, better than Tampa can against Boston. Like the difference between Tampa and Colorado, by the way, even though those aren't the teams we're comparing, you look at the depth, the roster-wide depth of Tampa, and you compare it to Colorado, and then you see why maybe Colorado just isn't quite there yet.
I mean, going into the playoffs, we would have been pretty excited about how Nichushkin and Burakovsky and how Donskoy were looking good. But at this point, yeah, I guess.
We were, but they're not Blake Coleman and Andre Palat and Anthony Cirelli. Like, it's just not the same. Yeah.
I guess that makes sense. It's interesting. Both Boston and Colorado, the teams that are losing 3-1, are both teams where their number 1 goalie is either hurt or just out of the picture in terms of Rask being gone and back to Finland. So I wonder if we're in a situation where you need to have... Anyways, whatever. I'm not going to read in too much. This is a thought that came to my head. But those would be 2 teams, I guess, the fans will always be wondering, what if Grubauer didn't get injured? What if Tuukka Rask would have stayed in the bubble? Maybe things would have been different, but we'll never know. Okay, so Brian, that's the playoffs. I guess there's one other team I wanted to talk to you about just because we didn't get a chance because last week we did our draft, so we didn't get to sort of recap the ends of the previous round. But over on St. Louis, there's a couple interesting storylines. So first of all, Vladimir Tarasenko, poor guy, he's going to have another shoulder surgery. He's expected to be out 5 months, so that means until around January. So who knows like how deep into the season that will be. We don't know when the next season is going to start yet. If it will, hopefully it will. But yeah, I wonder like if Tarasenko's ever going to be the same. Now, another shoulder surgery. We don't know if he aggravated the injury in the playoffs or if it was like a new thing that happened or like, you know what I mean? Like at this point, we already sort of talked about this before when he left with injury, but now having another surgery, it's just, I hope that Tarasenko will get fully healthy again. So we'll be able to see him at full capacity for another few seasons. But at this point, you got to wonder if that's ever going to happen.
Yeah, it's very murky, not knowing if he was still hurt and came back too fast or was supposedly healed and they didn't know, or if this is something new or different. It's concerning though. And there's nothing to say about it at this point, though. This is the sort of thing that you'll follow between now and whenever the next season starts and see what our confidence level is that Tarasenko is up and running.
One quick thing up. Yeah, I guess if Tarasenko is out, and obviously you don't really like to talk about who benefits from an injury, but I guess that's what we do on this podcast. So this season, like David Perron, I think is the guy who got on the top power play that's normally not there. Like, well, I don't know. You could tell me. O'Reilly, Perron, Schenn, Schwartz were like the forwards on the top power play. It seemed to me like Perron would have been the odd man out if Tarasenko had been healthy all year, and he obviously really benefited. He had a great season. So I think with Tarasenko potentially out now to start next season, to me, maybe that raises David Perron's stock. That's the best I got for you for a fantasy impact of Tarasenko missing the start of next season.
Yeah, you're way too early fantasy impact.
Okay, yeah. And then the other thing we got to talk about is Jordan Binnington did not have a good playoffs. He ended the playoffs with an .851 save percentage in his 5 games, no wins. Meanwhile, Jake Allen also played 5 games, had a .935 save percentage. We've talked about this to death, but I feel like let's just put a stamp on it here now that it's over. Like we already talked about how Allen outperformed Binnington in the regular season, obviously in many fewer games. But now going to next season, like what are people going to do? Like, do you draft Binnington? Do you draft Jake Allen? Like, and also remember this goalie, Jim Carey, who was on the Washington Capitals and won I think it was the Vezina Trophy.
You've been on goalie posts too recently, haven't
I did. You? Yeah, okay. how much do I have to cite like when I read things? And then you're right. I think I did see that tweet. I don't think I actually went on goalie post, but I think I saw a tweet go by about like, is Binnington the next Jim Carey? And yeah, it's a goalie, great rookie season and then completely disappeared. And I'm not saying Binnington will completely disappear, but I'm not saying that because this hasn't been a great season. And now next year is going to be pretty huge. Like if Binnington struggles again next year, it won't be long before people start calling this guy, a one-hit wonder.
For sure. But it's too soon for that, but it's also too soon to know whether the Blues have learned anything from their playoff choice to play Binnington over Allen. I still remember in the final game of that series, in the final couple games, like I just assumed Jake Allen was starting, and then I went to the box scores and I was like, "What is this really like the Blues really went with Binnington here against all evidence and reason?" I mean, sure, Binnington's the guy who you want to cup with. You want to be loyal. You want to say that, hey, we still believe in you. But this is the same mistake Pittsburgh made in the first round too. You got to go with the new hotness, especially if you're in a short-term series with high stakes implications. No one would have blamed them for going with Jake Allen, but there's a lot of blame to go around for the Blues choosing Binnington. So we'll see what happens. I think, honestly, Allen is a good tandem goalie. I don't think he can ever be more than that. So either way, they both play 40 games next year. They both probably do pretty well. The end. It's not a very exciting goalie fantasy-wise situation for me.
Yeah. It'll be fun to do a recap of the year, maybe at the end, like whose goalie's stock dropped the most from the beginning of the season to now. And it must be Binnington, because I believe he was being drafted like 3rd, 4th goalie taken in a lot of leagues going into this year after leading the Blues to the Cup. And now next year, like good luck being in the top 15 goalies drafted with the way things went and with Allen also having done so well. By the way, I need to correct myself. I think I said that Pat Maroon might win his like first cup this year. I think I might have said that when I was rambling about Tampa. Obviously, he won last year with St. Louis. Yeah. So he'd be maybe going for his 2nd cup in 2 years. Which would be pretty cool. Then I guess a lot of teams are going to be going after Pat Maroon for next year because he's a good luck charm. That's what Go Hollywood saying here. Pat Maroon, their spirit guide on their road to the cup. So Brian, that is now everything that I had planned to talk about on this episode. Any final thoughts on your side before we wrap this baby up?
No, let's wrap this baby up. Let's swaddle it.
Okay. You could tell that this is a dad here because you were very quick on the uptake with that one. Okay. So yeah, thanks everyone for listening. We hope you enjoyed the show. Again, check the show notes for all of the links for everything that we were talking about over at the start. But yeah, Brian, I guess, what else should I say? Oh yeah, we would love a follow on Twitter. We'd love to hear from you. We don't actually get much feedback for our shows. I'm going to throw it out there. Like, it's fine. Like, if you're enjoying the show in silent, that's cool. But if you like the show, let us know. I don't know. Maybe I'd like to know if people like it, or if you didn't like something about it. I always like to hear things about how we can improve. So tweet at us at Keeping Karlsson. Let us know your thoughts. If you made it to the end and you liked it or you didn't like it. Obviously, we always appreciate a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're rating your podcasts. We've got.
Can I also add, if you write a note with that, it's also really fantastic. Don't just hit 5 stars, but write a nice thing about us.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take it. I can use a compliment. My wife likes to tell me that I'm driven by compliments, and they fuel me more than they should. But I'll just have to, live that. Like, that's my truth. I'll just have to own that. That's what I want to say. But you know what? I'm just gonna own that. I think that's just who I am. So yeah, I'll take a compliment. If it's going to be a negative thing, leave it to Twitter, okay? And not on Apple Podcasts. That's a permanent thing. I don't like just having to read that every single time. But on Twitter, fine, yeah, let us know if you didn't like something. But okay, blah, blah, blah. Oh, we have our Patreon program, keepingkarlsson.com/patron. We're having a lot of fun with the patrons. You join our Facebook group. You join our Discord. We're chatting all over the place, right? And Brian and I are on both, right? So you write something somewhere. If you want a response from us, we'll be there. We'll see it. And yeah, it's been a blast talking hockey with all the patrons all throughout the summer, and we still got a few weeks left. So let's cue the outro music. And Brian, why don't you go ahead and read us the credits?
All right. Before I do, I'll just remind everyone that we have our list of hockey, sport, anti-racism resources posted at keepingkarlsson.com/BLM. Make sure to check them out. Logo art for this episode and every episode by Brandon Weeb. Outro music by Pat Roach. This episode was researched with help from Dobber Hockey, Frozen Pool, Dobber Prospects, Natural Stat Trick, Evolving Hockey, Cap Friendly, Charting Hockey, Hockey Reference, Hockey Viz, Hockey Database, Elite Prospects, and Roto World. Do you
want to, I don't know. Say that.
Just do it again.
Just do the and Roto World part with a little more enthusiasm to match everything else.
And Roto World.
Okay, that was too much now. Now give me a medium. Let me tell you. I'm like a director here. Like, okay, now give me a little less.
And Roto World.
Great job, as always, Brian. This was a blast. Next week, will we be done this round? I feel like things go by so fast. I don't know what we're going to do next week, but I think if this round is over, we might have another draft for the final 4 of the KKPP. That's one episode idea. So we'll see what happens. A lot could happen. But yeah, hope you've liked the show. And stick around because we're going to be back at you with another episode next week.
Until then, remember... am I going to drop it? It's so cheesy, but I'm going to do it.
It's not cheesy. It's our new thing.
Until then, fantasy hockey. Oh, no, not until then.
Well, I said, let's workshop this. Okay, so I said, we'll talk to you next week.
Next week.
So you can say until then. Until then, remember, fantasy hockey is for
see you next week, and remember, okay.
Yeah.
See you next week. See you next week, and remember, fantasy hockey is for everyone.
Woo! Wow, I wonder what people are going to think of our new intro and outro. So you kind of dissed on my intro right at the start. I was saying 2 guys who are losing to...
I mean, it was just who's Tom?
Well, because he was the star of the last episode. I don't know. I thought people might remember.
Maybe
it was bad. Maybe it was a bad intro. Let me do another one right now just as a backup, okay?
Okay.
Let me think of one. 2 guys who...
I think if you write it out, it might be helpful.
Well, I just want to decide what it's going to be.
Did you have this one written out?
No, I thought of it 10 minutes before.
Okay.
What are we? We're 2 guys that do what? That has something to do with this episode. Let me think here. 2 guys who... I don't know. It's hard to come up with these off the top of my head.
Who are you could still mention the playoff pool.
Oh yeah, okay, fine. 2 guys.
You were doing great until it's Tom.
2 guys.
Tom is great, but I just don't know it'll resonate. People will listen to that and be like, "Oh yeah, Tom! I can't wait for the rest of this episode."
Okay. Let me try off the top of my head. 2 guys who are currently not looking likely to move forward in the Keeping Karlsson playoff pool. Okay. Yeah. Also, do you think it's like weird to have like a big exciting yes and then go into the anti-racism talk? Should I have a more like chill yes? Okay, no. Okay. So you're saying it's fine.
Yes.
Yeah! Yes! Welcome everybody to another episode of the Keeping Karlsson Fantasy Hockey Podcast, the longest running fantasy hockey podcast in the world, hosted by 2 guys who are probably not going to be moving forward in the Keeping Karlsson playoff pool, which we drafted last week. But that's okay, because we're still going to be here to talk hockey. I'm your host, Elon Dabrowski, and with me, as always, is my good friend and opponent. I'm your host, Elon Dabrowski, and with me, as always, is my opponent in the KKPP, but my friend in life, Brian Com.
Hello, Elon. Hello, everybody. And yes, Elon, thank you for rubbing it in right off the top that we are not looking poised to move on in the Keeping Karlsson playoff pool, which is a bummer, but it just speaks to the level of competition there is when we have a pool with our listeners.
Shout out to Tom, Epic Neil Time, who crushed it last week in our draft. And so far, we'll see if your team can take you all the way. The only problem with Tom is he's got a lot of Boston, Colorado, Tampa, and Dallas players. And if both of those series end tomorrow or whatever their next games are, he's going to have to hold on to this lead. So we'll see what happens. Okay, we'll see if I could edit that in. All right. Good job, pal. Thanks for listening. Thanks, YouTube user, for saying nice show. Good night to you as well. I wonder now if it's like, do I not see the name because of Be Live, or is it because they're called YouTube user on YouTube? I guess whatever. Okay, we'll figure it out. But thank you. Thanks again. Go Hollywood. And
go hole. This sounded like a slur.
Well, I don't. My brain doesn't work the way yours does, Brian. I don't think everything is sexual. Or a goal or an insult.
A slur was not meant. I didn't mean it in a sexual way.
Oh,
that would be a euphemism.
True.
So I guess your brain is not like mine in that it.
Yeah, because when I hear hole, that, and then when
you think sexual,
that way,
yeah, I think a-hole.
A-hole is also kind of sexual, depending how you use it.
I rarely hear it mentioned in a common.
What if you say nice in front of it? What do you say, nice a-hole?
It might just be like you taunting someone, like nice one, a-hole.
Nice a-hole. Yeah, it's like really where you put that like comma makes a big difference. Nice a-hole. And they're like, oh, thank you. We have fun. Okay, bye. Bye, everyone.